Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe. We are so happy that you are joining us today for another exciting and educational episode. On this podcast, we take big world topics and explain them in clear and simple English, so you can practice listening, learn new vocabulary, and at the same time understand something very important about our world. So make yourself comfortable, because today's journey will be full of learning and discovery.
Yes, welcome everyone. It is always a pleasure to speak with you here on the English Globe. Every episode, our goal is to help you grow your English skills step by step. We know that many of you listen while studying, walking, working, or maybe even relaxing at home. No matter where you are, this time is for you to learn, improve, and enjoy. And today we have chosen a topic that is not only educational, but also deeply connected to the modern world.
That's right, Julia. Our topic today is China's economic growth, from 1978 reforms to today. We will explore how China, once a country with a closed and state-controlled economy, became one of the world's largest and most influential economic powers. This story is fascinating because it shows how decisions, reforms, and changes can transform the lives of millions of people. It is also important because China's economy affects the entire world, including the jobs, products, and technology that many of us use every day.
Exactly, Adam. For English learners, this topic is especially valuable. Why? Because when we learn English, we are not only learning grammar and vocabulary, we are also learning about culture, history, politics, and economics. All of these things are part of how English is used in real conversations around the world. If you want to talk to people from other countries, do business, study abroad, or simply understand the news, then knowing about China's economic growth gives you both knowledge and language power.
And think about it, dear listeners. Every time you read an article online, watch international news, or talk with friends about global issues, China's economy might come up. People may ask, how did China grow so fast? Why is it important in today's world? What role does China play in business, trade, and technology? These are big questions, and by listening today, you will not only learn the answers, but you will also learn the English phrases and words that will help you express your own thoughts.
That's such an important point, Adam. And before we dive deeper into the details, we would like to ask all of you, our wonderful listeners, for a small favor. If you enjoy learning with us here at the English Globe, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future episodes. Your support really helps us keep creating more educational content for you and for learners around the world.
Yes, please do. And we would also love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Are you in Asia, Africa, Europe, or maybe the Americas? Are you listening while at school, at work, or at home? Share your location, your learning journey, and even your opinions about today's topic. Do you think China's economic rise has influenced your country? Has it changed your daily life in some way? We truly want to know your thoughts.
We read every comment, and it always makes us so happy to see the global family of the English Globe. You are not only students of English, you are also part of a big international community of learners who are curious about the world. By sharing your ideas, you also practice your English writing, which is a great extra benefit. So don't be shy, write to us in the comments and join the conversation.
Now, as we continue with today's episode, let me give you a little preview. In this podcast, we are going to take you on a journey through history. We will start by looking at what China's economy was like before 1978, when it was closed and state-controlled. Then, we will move into the period of reforms under Deng Xiaoping, who introduced policies that changed everything. After that, we will talk about how China opened up to the world, joined the World Trade Organization, and became the manufacturing hub of the planet.
Yes, and after that, we will look at the rapid growth of the 2000s, the rise of technology companies, and China's role in global projects like the Belt and Road Initiative. Finally, we will think about the challenges China faces today and what the future might look like. By the end of this episode, you will have a clear picture of China's economic transformation, and you will have learned a lot of useful English expressions that you can use in your own conversations.
So stay with us, dear listeners, because this episode will not only expand your knowledge, but also strengthen your English skills. Remember, learning English is not just about memorizing grammar rules. It is about connecting with the world, understanding important ideas, and being able to express yourself clearly and confidently. That's what we are here to help you do.
And with that, let's begin our journey into one of the most remarkable economic stories of modern times. We are going to step back in history to the period before 1978, when China's economy looked very different from what it is today. But before we open that door, take one more moment to like, subscribe, and comment where you are listening from. Your engagement makes a big difference for us and for our community of learners.
Before we dive into the reforms that changed China, it is important to understand what life was like in the country before 1978. China had a very different economic system at that time. It was a planned economy, which means that the government controlled almost everything. The government decided what would be produced, how much would be produced, and at what price it would be sold. Farmers worked on collective farms, factories were owned by the state, and there was very little room for private business.
Yes, Adam. And this type of system created many challenges. For example, farmers did not have personal control over their land. Instead, they worked on large collective farms where everyone shared the responsibility and the harvest. Because of this, farmers had very little motivation to work harder or innovate. No matter how much effort they put in, the rewards were the same. This lack of personal incentive often meant that food production was low, and sometimes the country even struggled with shortages.
That's right, Julia. And it was not only in farming. The same idea applied to factories. Factories produced goods not because people demanded them, but because the government had created a plan. Sometimes the plan asked for too much of one product and not enough of another. Imagine a situation where there are too many shoes in one region but not enough shirts in another. This was a common problem in a planned economy, and it led to inefficiency. People often waited in long lines to buy basic goods.
Another important thing to understand is that China was largely closed to the outside world. Trade with other countries was very limited. Most goods were produced and consumed inside China, with little connection to the global market. This isolation meant that Chinese industries did not benefit from new technologies or global competition. While other countries were beginning to grow their economies through trade, China was focusing almost entirely on self-sufficiency, which limited its ability to modernize quickly.
Yes, Julia. And if we think about the standard of living at that time, it was very low compared to today. Many people lived in rural areas, working on farms. Cities were smaller, and consumer goods like refrigerators, televisions, or even simple clothing options were rare. For most families, life was about meeting basic needs: food, shelter, and simple clothing. Education and health care were available, but resources were often limited, and economic growth was very slow.
For our listeners, it's important to understand some key vocabulary from this period. The first term is collective farming. This means that land and resources were shared among many people, and farmers did not own their land. Another term is state-owned enterprises, which are factories or companies owned and managed by the government. And the last term is self-sufficiency, which means trying to produce everything you need by yourself, without depending on other countries. These words will help you follow our story more easily.
Thank you, Julia. That's very helpful. Another important point is that the government's economic decisions were heavily influenced by ideology. At that time, China followed a socialist model inspired by the Soviet Union. The idea was that the state should control production to ensure equality among people. However, in practice, this system often led to inefficiency, waste, and poor results. People had fewer choices, and innovation was very difficult because everything needed official approval.
Yes, Adam, and we must also mention the Great Leap Forward, which took place between 1958 and 1962. This was an attempt to rapidly increase industrial and agricultural production by organizing people into huge communes. Unfortunately, it caused serious problems. The agricultural methods used were not effective, and the push for fast results led to mistakes. The result was widespread hunger and a significant decline in living standards. This experience showed the dangers of forcing rapid change without careful planning.
Exactly. And later, during the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 1970s, many schools and universities were disrupted, and intellectuals were often criticized or even punished. This meant that for many years, China's human resources, its talented students and thinkers, were not being used effectively to develop the economy. Education suffered, and the economy could not grow as it might have with more skilled workers. So by the mid-1970s, China was in a difficult position, with low productivity and little connection to the outside world.
For English learners, this is a good moment to reflect on how language and economics connect. When we talk about economies, we often use words like growth, production, efficiency, and resources. These words describe the movement of goods and services in a country. So when we say China's economy before 1978 was inefficient, it means that the system wasted resources and could not produce enough to meet people's needs. Learning these words helps you understand not only history, but also modern news and discussions.
That's such a good point. And it's also important to see the contrast. On one side, you had countries like the United States, Japan, and parts of Europe, which were growing quickly through trade, technology, and private business. On the other side, you had China, which was still very closed and controlled. This gap between China and other major economies created pressure for change. Many leaders began to realize that something had to shift if the country wanted to improve living standards and catch up with the rest of the world.
Exactly, Adam. So, by the late 1970s, China faced a choice. Should it continue with the old system of state control and isolation? Or should it try something new, something that might open the door to growth, trade, and modernization? This was the big question at the time. And as we will see in the next part of our story, a leader named Deng Xiaoping played a key role in answering that question by introducing reforms that would completely change the future of China.
Before we move on, let's summarize what we've learned so far for our listeners. First, China's economy before 1978 was a planned economy, controlled by the state. Second, farming was done on collective farms, which often reduced motivation and productivity. Third, factories were state-owned, and production was based on government plans, not consumer demand. Fourth, China was largely closed to the outside world, with little international trade. And finally, living standards were generally low, with limited access to goods and technology.
That's a great summary, Adam. And dear listeners, think about this for a moment. If you lived in China during that time, what would life feel like? Imagine working on a farm where you don't own the land, or living in a city where you cannot choose what products to buy because the government decides for you. This is a powerful reminder of how economic systems affect everyday life. And understanding this background will make it easier for you to see why the reforms after 1978 were so revolutionary.
Now that we understand what China's economy looked like before 1978, let us turn to the man who would bring dramatic change, Deng Xiaoping. Deng was not the top leader in title, but he became the most influential reformer in practice. He believed that China could not continue with the old model of strict central planning and isolation. Instead, He wanted to create a system that mixed socialism with elements of the market economy, a system he described as socialism with Chinese characteristics.
That phrase is very interesting, Adam. Deng knew that simply copying Western capitalism would not work in China because the country had its own history, traditions, and political system. So he created a new approach. His idea was simple but powerful. The state would still guide the overall direction of the economy, but individuals and businesses would have more freedom to make decisions. This meant that farmers, workers, and entrepreneurs could have more control. And more importantly, they could keep some of the profits from their hard work.
Yes, Julia. One of Deng's earliest reforms was in agriculture. In the late 1970s, he introduced the household responsibility system. This allowed farmers to manage their own plots of land, even though the land was still officially owned by the state. Farmers could decide what to grow, and after giving a certain share to the government, they were allowed to keep the rest. This was a huge change because it gave farmers an incentive to produce more. The result was impressive. Food production increased rapidly, and living standards in rural areas began to rise.
Exactly, Adam. For English learners, let's pause here and explain a key word: incentive. An incentive is something that motivates people to work harder or do better. Under the old collective farming system, there was no incentive because everyone got the same reward, no matter how much they worked. But under the household responsibility system, farmers had a real incentive because if they produced more, they could keep more. This simple change created a big improvement in productivity and people's daily lives.
And agriculture was just the beginning. Deng also realized that China needed to connect with the outside world. To do this, he created special economic zones, SEZs, in the early 1980s. These were areas mainly along the coast, where foreign companies could invest and where market rules were more flexible. Cities like Shenzhen, which was just a small fishing village at the time, were chosen to become SEZs. These zones became experiments for economic reform, allowing China to learn from international business practices and attract foreign capital.
Yes, and the results were dramatic. Foreign companies began to set up factories in these zones, bringing jobs, technology, and knowledge. For the first time in decades, China started opening its doors to international trade and investment. This was not easy because it meant changing many old rules and allowing foreign influence. But Deng was willing to take the risk because he believed that China could grow stronger by learning from the rest of the world. And as history shows, he was correct.
Another important reform was the gradual opening of markets for private businesses. Under Deng's policies, small private enterprises were allowed to operate again. People could start shops, restaurants, and small factories. At first, these businesses were limited, but even small changes created huge differences in daily life. Suddenly, people had more choices. They could buy more goods, eat in different places, and see a variety of products that were not available before. This made life more colorful and dynamic, and it also encouraged entrepreneurship.
And listeners, here's another useful word: entrepreneurship. This word describes the process of starting and running your own business. In China during the 1980s, entrepreneurship was not just about making money. It was about creating a new culture of innovation, risk-taking, and independence. Many young people saw opportunities that their parents had never imagined. They could open a store, design a product, or start a company, and they could keep the profits. This change gave people both financial hope and personal pride.
Of course, Deng's reforms were not welcomed by everyone at first. Some leaders worried that giving people more freedom in the economy would lead to social problems or even political challenges. But Deng had a famous saying: "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice." What he meant was that the old debate between socialism and capitalism was less important than practical results. If a policy improved people's lives and grew the economy, then it was worth doing, no matter what ideology it came from.
That saying really shows Deng's pragmatic style. He focused on results, not on strict ideology. And those results were quickly visible. During the 1980s, China's economy began to grow at rates it had never seen before. Millions of people were lifted out of poverty, and new opportunities appeared everywhere. The country was changing, not only in numbers and statistics, but also in the way people thought about work, success, and the future. For the first time in decades, many Chinese people felt hopeful.
Another part of Deng's reforms was education. He understood that a modern economy needed skilled workers, scientists, and engineers. So he reopened universities, encouraged students to study abroad, and invested in training programs. This decision would later play a huge role in China's development, especially in science and technology. Education became a tool for modernization, and many of the students who studied abroad returned with new ideas that helped China grow even faster in the following decades.
For our listeners, notice how reform is connected to many areas at once: farming, industry, trade, private business, and education. This is why Deng's reforms were so powerful. They were not just one small policy, they were a whole package of changes that touched every part of society. And for English learners, this shows how important it is to understand the word reform. A reform means an improvement or change made to fix problems. Deng's reforms fix the inefficiencies of the past and open the path to growth.
Yes, Julia. By the end of the 1980s, China was already a very different country than it had been just a decade earlier. Cities were growing, farms were producing more, and foreign investment was flowing in. While the political system remained under strong state control, the economy had opened in new and creative ways. Deng Xiaoping did not just change policies, he changed the mindset of the nation. People began to believe that progress was possible and that hard work and innovation would be rewarded.
That is a great way to put it, Adam. And this is where we will close this section. We have seen how Deng Xiaoping's leadership marked the beginning of a new chapter in China's story. By introducing the household responsibility system, special economic zones, private businesses, and stronger education, he gave China the tools it needed to grow. In the next part of our podcast, we will explore how these early reforms in the 1980s and 1990s began to reshape the entire economy and connect China more deeply with the rest of the world.
Now that we have looked at Deng Xiaoping's reforms, let us see how they changed daily life in China during the 1980s and 1990s. The results were clear and powerful. Agriculture was the first area to feel the impact. When farmers were allowed to make decisions and keep extra harvests, production increased quickly. For the first time in many years, food shortages became less common. Rural families began to see improvements in diet, clothing, and even small savings for the future.
That's right, Adam. In many villages, people who once struggled to feed their families now had enough rice, vegetables, and sometimes even meat on their tables. This was a huge change in quality of life. Farmers who worked harder and used better methods could finally see rewards. They could sell their surplus in local markets and use the money for other needs. This new freedom gave people a sense of control over their lives, something they had not experienced under the collective farming system.
Yes, and at the same time, towns and small cities started to grow. Many local governments encouraged people to start township and village enterprises, also known as TVES. These were small factories or workshops owned collectively by villages or towns, but managed more like private businesses. They produced simple goods such as clothing, shoes, tools, and household items. These enterprises created jobs for people in rural areas, so they did not have to move far away to find work. It was a step toward industrialization.
Exactly, Adam. And these township and village enterprises became very important. By the late 1980s, millions of people were employed in them, and they provided much-needed income for local governments. This system was different from the past. because instead of waiting for orders from Beijing, local communities could decide what to produce and how to sell it. This flexibility encouraged innovation. If there was demand for bicycles or simple electronics, local factories could make them and sell them quickly.
And then came the boom of the special economic zones, especially Shenzhen. As we mentioned earlier, Shenzhen was a small fishing village in the late 1970s. But with Deng's reforms, it became one of the fastest-growing cities in the world. Foreign companies from Hong Kong, Japan, the United States, and Europe began building factories there. They brought new technology, new management skills, and most importantly, new opportunities for Chinese workers. Shenzhen became a model of modernization, showing the rest of China what was possible.
Yes, Adam, and this also meant that for the first time in many decades, China was exporting large amounts of goods. Factories produced clothing, toys, electronics, and other products that were sold around the world. The phrase "made in China" started to become familiar in many countries. This growth in exports brought foreign currency into China, which was essential for buying new machines, building infrastructure, and investing in education. The country was slowly connecting itself to the global economy.
Another big impact was urban migration. During the 1980s and 1990s, millions of people moved from rural villages to growing cities to find work. This was not easy, because leaving the countryside meant big changes in lifestyle. But many were willing to take the risk, because city jobs paid more and offered better opportunities. The movement of people created new challenges, such as housing shortages, but it also helped fuel the rapid growth of cities. Urban China started to look very different from the quiet villages of the past.
Yes, and life in the cities also changed. For the first time, people could see shops filled with goods, restaurants offering different foods, and buses or trains carrying workers across busy streets. Small businesses flourished. Families could save money to buy bicycles, televisions, or even motorbikes. These consumer goods gave people a sense of progress and modernity. For English learners, notice the word consumer goods. This means products that people buy for their daily use, such as clothes, furniture, or electronics.
Another major effect of the reforms was the improvement in living standards. The government began to measure GDP growth, gross domestic product, as a sign of progress. GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced in a country. During the 1980s and 1990s, China's GDP grew at rates of 8 to 10% per year, which was extraordinary. This rapid growth meant that millions of people were lifted out of poverty, something that had never happened so quickly in world history.
And while this growth was exciting, it also brought new challenges. For example, inequality began to rise. People in the coastal cities like Shenzhen, Shanghai, and Guangzhou became much wealthier than those in inland rural areas. Some families were able to build modern homes and send their children to good schools, while others in poorer regions still struggled. This gap between rich and poor was one of the social costs of reform. It showed that while economic growth brings opportunities, it can also create divisions.
Yes, and the environment also started to suffer. With so many new factories and rapid industrialization, pollution became a major issue. Rivers, air, and soil were affected by industrial waste. Cities like Beijing and Shanghai experienced smog, which made breathing difficult at times. While the government focused on growth first, environmental protection was not always a priority in the 1980s and 1990s. This is something China continues to deal with even today, showing that growth often comes with hidden costs.
That's true, Adam. And for English learners, it's good to notice some important terms from this period. First, urbanization, which means the movement of people from rural areas to cities. Second, exports, which are goods sold to other countries. And third, inequality, which means differences in wealth and opportunities between groups of people. These are key words to understand when discussing not only China's economy, but also global economic changes in general.
Another interesting point is how reforms changed culture. With more freedom and exposure to the outside world, Chinese people started to experience new ideas. Western movies, music, and fashion slowly entered the country. Universities reopened, and many students traveled abroad to study. When they returned, they brought back new knowledge and perspectives. This cultural exchange played an important role in shaping the modern Chinese identity, combining traditional values with global influences.
Yes, and education was crucial. The government expanded schools and universities, giving more people access to higher education. Literacy rates improved, and families saw education as the key to success in this new economy. Parents worked hard so their children could study because they knew that skilled workers, engineers, and managers would have better chances in the future. This focus on education created a foundation for China's later rise in technology and innovation.
By the end of the 1990s, China had already transformed in remarkable ways. It was no longer a closed, agrarian country. It had become an emerging industrial power with strong trade connections to the rest of the world. Millions had moved out of poverty, and the cities were growing at an incredible pace. But this was only the beginning. In the early 2000s, China would take another giant step when it joined the World Trade Organization, connecting even more deeply with global markets.
That's right, Adam. So, to summarize for our listeners, in the 1980s and 1990s, Deng Xiaoping's reforms had clear impacts. Farmers gained incentives, towns created enterprises, cities expanded, exports grew, living standards improved. But inequality and pollution also became challenges. This period set the stage for China's rise as a global economic power. And in our next section, we will talk about how joining the World Trade Organization in 2001 opened a completely new chapter in China's economic story.
Dear listeners, now we reach one of the most important turning points in modern economic history: China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001. For years before that, China had been reforming and experimenting with opening its economy. But joining the WTO was different, because it was like receiving an official invitation to sit at the global table of trade. The WTO is an international body that sets rules for trade between countries, and membership gave China full access to world markets.
That's right, Adam. By joining the WTO, China agreed to follow global trade rules, reduce tariffs, and make it easier for goods, services, and investments to move across borders. This decision had a massive impact. Suddenly, international companies could see China not just as a large population, but as a huge market and a reliable manufacturing hub. And for China, it was the green light to expand its role as the world's factory. Factories multiplied, exports surged, and supply chains became deeply connected with China.
To make this clear for our listeners, let's break down some key terms. First, the word globalization. Globalization means the process by which countries become more connected through trade, technology, travel, and communication. When China joined the WTO, globalization accelerated. Products made in China could be shipped everywhere, and foreign companies could invest in Chinese factories. This created a powerful flow of goods, services, and ideas across borders.
Another important term is supply chain. A supply chain is the complete system of making and delivering a product. For example, if you buy a smartphone, the screen might be designed in South Korea, the chip produced in Taiwan, the software written in the United States, and the phone assembled in a Chinese factory. By joining the WTO, China became a central hub in these global supply chains. Millions of products began to depend on Chinese labor, infrastructure, and efficiency.
And of course, there's the phrase foreign direct investment, often shortened to FDI. This means money that companies or individuals from one country invest directly into building businesses, factories, or offices in another country. After 2001, China received huge amounts of foreign direct investment. International companies built manufacturing plants in cities like Shenzhen, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. This created jobs for Chinese workers, introduced new technology, and linked China tightly with the global economy.
Exactly, Adam. And we must not forget the impact on people's lives. Before WTO membership, many Chinese citizens worked in agriculture or small industries. But after 2001, millions of workers migrated from the countryside to cities to work in new factories. Wages increased, living standards improved, and the Chinese middle class began to grow. At the same time, people in other countries could buy cheaper goods, from clothing to electronics, because of China's efficient production.
This was not only about cheap products, though. It was also about technology transfer. By opening up to foreign companies, China gained access to advanced manufacturing techniques, management skills, and international business practices. For English learners, this is an important idea. Technology transfer means knowledge, skills, and technology moving from one country to another. China learned quickly, and soon it was not only producing cheap goods, but also improving the quality and sophistication of its products.
Another effect was on global competition. When China entered world markets, other developing countries had to compete with its low labor costs and large-scale production. Some industries in other nations struggled because factories moved to China where production was cheaper. At the same time, developed countries like the United States and those in Europe benefited from lower prices, but they also faced debates about jobs moving overseas. This shows how interconnected globalization can be. Benefits and challenges spread across borders.
One fascinating example is the electronics industry. Take laptops or smartphones. After 2001, production chains often placed final assembly in China. This gave China enormous experience in high-volume, high-quality manufacturing. Over time, Chinese companies themselves became more competitive, launching their own brands and exporting not just products, but technology. For listeners learning English, words like assembly, exports, and brands are key vocabulary to understand in this context.
The WTO membership also meant that China had to follow international rules more carefully. It reduced tariffs, which are taxes on imports and exports, making trade smoother. It allowed more foreign companies to operate inside China. This created a sense of trust in the global economy. Investors felt safer putting money into China because they knew the country was part of a system with transparent rules. This, again, made the flow of foreign direct investment much stronger.
But Julia, it's important to point out that this growth brought challenges as well. While many Chinese families saw their income rise, others were left behind. Rural areas developed more slowly, and inequality between city and countryside widened. Environmental problems also grew, because the rush to build factories and produce goods led to pollution of air, water, and soil. So while WTO entry was a milestone for growth, it also forced China to think about long-term sustainability.
True, Adam. And we should also reflect on how this period shaped global perceptions of China. Before 2001, many people saw China as a distant, developing country. But after it joined the WTO and exports flooded international markets, China became part of everyday life around the world. From toys to clothes to electronics, Made in China became a global label. For English learners, this is a reminder that economics is not just numbers. It's connected to what we see, use, and buy every single day.
For our listeners, one of the main lessons here is that joining international organizations can transform a country's economy. In simple words, when China joined the WTO, it connected itself to the world in a deeper way. It became part of globalization, it entered global supply chains, it attracted foreign direct investment, and it changed the lives of millions of people. These words, globalization, supply chain, foreign direct investment, are not just abstract terms. They describe real changes in how people live and work.
And that is why this moment in 2001 is considered historic. It's not just about economics. It's about culture, society, and daily life. It shows us how decisions at the international level can touch ordinary families, influence jobs, and shape the future of a nation. For you as English learners, listening to this story is also a way to understand how our world is connected and how the language of economics and globalization can help you read news, study, or work in an international environment.
After joining the WTO in 2001, China entered a period of extraordinary growth during the 2000s. The economy expanded at double-digit rates for many years, which means the GDP, gross domestic product, or the total value of all goods and services, was rising faster than almost anywhere else in the world. It was like watching a rocket launch. Year after year, China built more factories, created more jobs, and lifted millions of people out of poverty.
That's a great way to describe it, Adam. The 2000s were a time when China truly transformed. People who had grown up in small farming villages suddenly found themselves moving to huge cities full of opportunity. This process is called urbanization, which means people moving from the countryside into towns and cities. The speed of urbanization in China was incredible. New highways, skyscrapers, and subway systems appeared, changing the lives of ordinary families.
Yes, Julia, and urbanization was connected to another big change: the rise of a middle class. In economic terms, the middle class refers to people who are not poor, but also not very rich. They usually have stable jobs, some disposable income, and the ability to buy products beyond basic needs. In China, millions of people entered this middle-income group during the 2000s. They could afford better housing, education for their children, and consumer goods like televisions, refrigerators, and later, smartphones.
And speaking of consumer goods, this was also the time when global brands became part of daily life in China. International companies saw a huge market, so they opened stores and invested in advertising. From cars to clothing to fast food, China's cities became filled with global names. At the same time, Chinese companies themselves began producing not just for exports, but also for the growing domestic market. This combination created a vibrant consumer culture.
But we should also talk about the industries that powered this growth. Manufacturing was at the heart of it all. Factories in China produced electronics, textiles, furniture, machinery, and countless other products. The phrase "made in China" spread across the globe. Exports grew rapidly, and foreign demand kept Chinese factories busy. This created millions of jobs, and because wages were relatively low at first, Chinese products were competitive in international markets.
Another industry that expanded quickly was construction. With millions of people moving to cities, China needed new homes, offices, and infrastructure. The government invested heavily in roads, airports, ports, and power plants. If you traveled to China during that time, you would see cranes everywhere, symbolizing rapid development. This massive construction boom not only provided jobs, but also supported industries like steel, cement, and glass, which became some of the largest in the world.
Listeners, it's important to understand that this kind of growth does not happen by accident. It requires planning, investment, and strong government policies. China's government encouraged development zones, supported export-oriented businesses, and provided financing for large projects. This environment gave companies confidence to expand. In fact, during the 2000s, China became the world's largest recipient of foreign direct investment, as international firms competed to be part of its growth story.
But Adam, with such fast growth, there were also new challenges. One of them was inequality. While many people became wealthier, not everyone shared equally in the benefits. Rural areas sometimes lagged behind, and poorer provinces did not develop as quickly as the coastal cities. This created a gap between urban and rural China. For English learners, this concept is called the income gap, or economic inequality, meaning some people or regions gain more wealth than others.
Another challenge was environmental pressure. Factories, cars, and construction produced large amounts of pollution. Air quality in major cities often became a serious problem, with smog covering skylines. Rivers and lakes also suffered from industrial waste. While the economic growth improved lives in many ways, it also created costs for the environment. This is why sustainability, finding ways to grow without harming future generations, became a growing concern in China.
And let's not forget the human side of this story. Millions of workers left their villages to join the new workforce in cities. They lived in dormitories, often working long hours, but they also earned money to send back home to their families. These workers played a key role in building China's economy. They were sometimes called migrant workers, moving within their own country but still facing challenges of adjustment, separation from families, and tough working conditions.
For the global economy, China's rise during the 2000s meant that supply chains became even more dependent on Chinese factories. Retailers and companies in Europe, America, and Asia ordered huge volumes of goods. Consumers around the world enjoyed lower prices, but at the same time, industries in other countries struggled to compete. Some jobs in manufacturing moved overseas to China, leading to debates in different nations about globalization and its impact on workers.
That's very true, Adam. And this global debate is still relevant today. China's rapid growth in the 2000s showed both the power and the complexity of globalization. On the one hand, it created efficiency and lifted millions of people out of poverty. On the other hand, it raised questions about fairness, the environment, and the future of jobs. These are issues that every English learner should think about, because they connect directly to our daily lives and to the future of our world.
To sum up this period, we can say that the 2000s were a decade of transformation. China became the world's manufacturing center. Cities grew at lightning speed, millions joined the middle class, and the country's global influence expanded. But along with these successes came challenges like inequality and environmental stress. For learners, the key vocabulary from this section includes urbanization, middle class, consumer goods, manufacturing, income gap, and sustainability.
And remember, dear listeners, that learning these words is not just about memorizing definitions. It's about connecting them to real stories. When you hear the word urbanization, you can now imagine millions of Chinese families moving into cities. When you think of sustainability, you can picture the smog in Beijing and the need for cleaner solutions. This is how language and history work together, making English learning more meaningful and connected to the world.
As we move into the 2010s, one of the most remarkable changes in China's economy was its rise as a technology powerhouse. This period saw the emergence of major tech companies, the expansion of the digital economy, and the growth of e-commerce. Companies like Alibaba, Tencent, and Huawei became global names, transforming the way people shop, communicate, and do business. China was no longer just a manufacturing center, it was becoming an innovation hub.
That's right, Adam. The rise of the digital economy was closely tied to education and research. Universities and research institutes began producing talented engineers, programmers, and scientists. Government policies supported innovation by funding research projects, providing tax incentives, and building tech parks. These efforts encouraged entrepreneurs to start new businesses, often called startups, in fields like artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, and online services.
Let's explain a key term for our listeners: digital economy. This refers to economic activity that uses digital technologies such as the internet, computers, and mobile devices. In China, the digital economy grew rapidly because millions of people adopted smartphones, online shopping platforms, and digital payment systems. For example, apps like Alipay and WeChat Pay became central to daily life, changing how people pay for goods and services and creating new business opportunities.
Another important term is innovation hub. An innovation hub is a place or ecosystem that encourages new ideas, research, and entrepreneurship. Cities like Shenzhen, Beijing, and Hangzhou became innovation hubs because they combined tech companies, universities, investors, and supportive policies. In these cities, new ideas could develop quickly, be tested, and then scaled up into successful businesses. This environment created a cycle of growth and creativity that attracted talent from all over China.
Yes, Julia. Startups played a key role in this ecosystem. A startup is a small company that aims to grow quickly by offering new products, services, or technologies. In China, thousands of startups emerged, many in e-commerce, mobile apps, and cloud computing. Some of them grew into global giants within a few years. The government also supported these startups with funding programs, incubators, and access to resources, which helped innovative ideas turn into real businesses that could compete internationally.
Education was also critical. Universities and technical institutes focused on STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This produced a highly skilled workforce ready to enter tech companies or create their own startups. Research and development became central to China's economic strategy. Investments in technology, from semiconductors to AI algorithms, gave Chinese companies a competitive advantage and helped the country move from low-cost manufacturing to high-tech innovation.
Another aspect to consider is e-commerce, which became a global phenomenon originating from China. Platforms like Taobao and JD.com changed how people shop. Consumers could buy products online, compare prices, and have goods delivered directly to their homes. This convenience revolutionized retail, not just in China, but around the world. Small businesses could reach millions of customers without owning a physical store, creating new economic opportunities and boosting entrepreneurship.
Listeners, here's another important vocabulary term: startups. These are small, innovative businesses designed to grow quickly. Many startups in China focused on solving problems or creating new ways for people to live, work, or shop. They benefited from venture capital, money invested by people who expect growth in return, and supportive government policies. Over time, some of these startups became massive corporations, contributing to China's global influence in technology.
Technology also affected traditional industries. Manufacturing became smarter with automation and robotics, logistics improved with digital tracking, and services moved online. Even banking and healthcare adopted digital tools. The digital economy not only created new sectors, but also transformed existing ones, making them faster, more efficient, and more customer-oriented. For English learners, it's useful to understand terms like automation, digital platforms, and technology adoption in this context.
The government's role cannot be understated. Policies like Made in China 2025 aim to advance innovation in key industries, from electronics to renewable energy. Grants, tax breaks, and incubators encouraged private enterprises to take risks and innovate. This coordination between public and private sectors created a strong innovation ecosystem. Education, research, and policy support worked together to make China a global tech leader in just a few decades.
It's also interesting to see how innovation hubs developed in cities beyond the major coastal areas. Secondary cities invested in tech parks, incubators, and universities, attracting young talent. These hubs encouraged collaboration between academia, industry, and investors, accelerating development. This network of innovation spread across the country, making China not only a manufacturing leader, but a global center for high-tech research, e-commerce, and digital services.
Another consequence of this tech rise is global influence. Chinese companies now compete internationally exporting not just physical goods, but also software, digital services, and advanced technology. This has changed global business patterns and international competition. For learners, words like innovation hub, digital economy, and startups are essential to understand discussions about modern economies, technology, and global trade.
To summarize, the rise of technology and innovation in China during the 2010s reshaped the economy. Digital platforms, e-commerce, tech startups, and research-driven companies created a vibrant ecosystem. People's lives changed as digital payments, online shopping, and smart services became widespread. China moved from being a low-cost manufacturing country to a global leader in technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship, setting the stage for future growth.
And that's why this period is crucial for understanding China today. Technology, education, and government support combine to create a new economic model. For English learners, studying these terms and concepts helps you understand current global news, business trends, and economic development. It's also a reminder that innovation can transform societies, create opportunities, and change daily life in remarkable ways.
Now we turn to one of China's most ambitious projects in the 21st century, the Belt and Road Initiative, often called BRI. Launched in 2013, this plan aims to connect China with countries across Asia, Europe, Africa, and beyond through infrastructure projects, trade agreements, and investment. It is named after the historical Silk Road trade routes, which linked China to distant lands. The initiative reflects China's vision of playing a larger role in global economic development.
That's right, Adam. The Belt and Road Initiative includes building highways, railways, ports, energy pipelines, and digital networks in participating countries. By doing so, China not only expands its trade routes, but also strengthens economic partnerships. For countries involved, these projects can boost growth, improve transportation, and create jobs. At the same time, China gains access to new markets, resources, and influence in global trade. It's a complex plan that connects multiple countries economically and strategically.
For English learners, it's important to understand key terms here. The word initiative means a plan or strategy to achieve a goal. The belt refers to land routes, mainly highways and railways, while the road refers to sea routes, like shipping lanes and ports. Through these connections, goods, services, and even digital data can move more efficiently across continents. China's goal is to become a central hub in this global network, linking its economy to the rest of the world.
Another term to know is global influence, which describes a country's ability to affect events, policies, or economies in other nations. With the Belt and Road Initiative, China has increased its global influence by investing in infrastructure and trade. Countries that benefit from these projects often rely on Chinese expertise, financing, and technology. This approach allows China to expand soft power while also promoting its economic interests internationally.
The BRI also emphasizes connectivity. This means linking people, businesses, and markets through better infrastructure. For example, faster railways between China and Europe reduce shipping times, helping companies export products more efficiently. Ports built in Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East allow goods to move smoothly. Digital networks connect financial systems, e-commerce platforms, and communication channels. These connections strengthen both China's economy and its trading partners' economies.
Education and training are also part of this initiative. Many countries receiving BRI investments benefit from knowledge transfer. Chinese companies often provide training programs for local workers, engineers, and managers. This ensures that projects are sustainable and that skills remain in the host country. For English learners, the phrase knowledge transfer means sharing expertise and experience so others can learn and improve. It's a key concept in international development and collaboration.
Another aspect of the Belt and Road Initiative is investment. China invests in industrial zones, energy projects, and technology parks in participating countries. This is a form of foreign direct investment, which we discussed earlier. By funding these projects, China creates opportunities for local employment and production. It also strengthens trade relationships, because goods and services can flow more easily along these newly developed corridors.
Listeners, this initiative also faces challenges. Some countries worry about debt levels because large infrastructure loans can create financial risks. Others express concerns about environmental impact or local employment. Transparency and long-term planning are important to ensure that projects benefit both China and partner countries. This demonstrates that even ambitious economic strategies must consider social, environmental, and political factors.
In addition to infrastructure, the Belt and Road Initiative extends to technology. China exports digital solutions, such as telecommunications equipment and smart city technologies, to participating countries. This strengthens connectivity and creates opportunities for collaboration in sectors like finance, healthcare, and logistics. Digital infrastructure is as important as physical roads and ports, because it allows countries to integrate with global markets efficiently.
For English learners, key vocabulary here includes initiative, global influence, connectivity, knowledge transfer, and foreign direct investment. These terms help explain how large-scale economic projects operate and how countries interact economically and politically. Understanding these words will make it easier to follow global news and discuss international economics in English.
Beyond trade and investment, the BRI also symbolizes China's role as a global leader. By building infrastructure and supporting development, China positions itself as a partner for growth in many regions. This influence is economic, political, and cultural. Countries along the Belt and Road increasingly interact with China through trade, diplomacy, and technology partnerships, reflecting the interconnected nature of today's global economy.
It's also important to note that the Belt and Road Initiative complements China's domestic strategy. Infrastructure and trade networks abroad support the export of Chinese goods, the expansion of services, and access to natural resources. This strategic alignment shows how international projects and domestic growth can reinforce each other, creating a cycle of development that strengthens China's overall position in the world.
To summarize, the Belt and Road Initiative represents a new phase in China's economic history. It combines infrastructure development, investment, technology, and education to increase global influence. While it offers opportunities for participating countries, it also comes with challenges that require careful planning. The initiative highlights China's ambition to connect with the world economically and strategically, shaping global trade patterns and regional development.
For English learners, studying this initiative is also a way to learn specialized vocabulary about global trade and economic strategy. Words like initiative, connectivity, knowledge transfer, foreign direct investment, and global influence are essential for understanding how countries interact today. Listening to these examples helps learners see the real-world application of these terms in international economics.
And that concludes this section, dear listeners. The Belt and Road Initiative shows that China's influence extends far beyond its borders, connecting people, businesses, and markets across continents. It is a key chapter in China's economic story and a critical part of understanding today's global economy. In our next section, we will discuss China's challenges and future outlook, including economic reforms, sustainability, and global competition. Dear listeners, as remarkable as China's growth has been, the country faces significant challenges today. One of the most pressing is the aging population. With fewer young people entering the workforce, there are concerns about how to support older citizens with pensions, healthcare, and social services. This demographic shift can slow economic growth, as a smaller workforce may reduce productivity and innovation over time.
That's true, Adam. Another major challenge is debt. Local governments, companies, and even households have borrowed heavily to finance rapid growth, infrastructure projects, and expansion. While borrowing has fueled development, it also creates financial risks if debts cannot be repaid. Policymakers need to carefully balance investment and fiscal responsibility to avoid instability in the economy.
Environmental pressures also remain a serious concern. Rapid industrialization and urbanization have caused air pollution, water shortages, and soil degradation. Although China has implemented measures to reduce emissions and promote renewable energy, the country must continue improving environmental standards. Sustainable growth requires balancing industrial development with protecting natural resources for future generations.
Slowing growth is another issue to consider. While China's economy grew at double-digit rates for decades, growth has naturally moderated as the economy matures. Maintaining stability while transitioning from export-driven manufacturing to domestic consumption and high-tech industries is a complex task. This shift requires strategic planning, innovation, and investment in sectors like technology, services, and green energy. Environmental sustainability is central to China's future direction. Initiatives in renewable energy, electric vehicles, energy efficiency, and pollution control show the government's commitment to greener development. China has become a world leader in solar panels, wind energy, and electric cars. These efforts aim to reduce environmental damage while sustaining economic growth, demonstrating that modern development requires responsibility toward the planet.
Demographic challenges, including the aging population, are also being addressed through policy changes. For example, China has relaxed family planning rules, encouraged higher fertility rates, and increased support for elderly care. These measures aim to balance the workforce, reduce social pressure, and maintain economic productivity. For English learners, words like demographic shift, fertility rate, and workforce are important when discussing population and economy.
Slower economic growth does not necessarily mean weakness. It can reflect a transition from rapid expansion to more stable and sustainable growth. By focusing on higher value industries, domestic consumption, innovation, and environmental responsibility, China seeks to maintain economic health over the long term. This period emphasizes quality of growth, not just quantity, highlighting strategic planning and foresight.
Global competition continues to drive innovation. Chinese companies are investing in artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, and fintech. Expanding research and development, partnerships with international firms, and support for startups allow China to remain competitive globally. Innovation also helps China move toward a knowledge-based economy, creating jobs that require advanced skills and technical expertise.
To summarize this section, China faces multiple challenges: aging population, debt, environmental pressures, slowing growth, and global competition. At the same time, reforms, innovation, and sustainable development strategies show the country's commitment to a more balanced and forward-looking economy. English learners should focus on vocabulary such as sustainable growth, balanced development, innovation, and demographic challenges to understand these concepts clearly.
Indeed, Julia. Listeners, understanding these challenges and strategies helps us see the bigger picture of China's economic journey. Growth is no longer just about speed, it's about stability, inclusivity, and sustainability. By adapting to demographic shifts, environmental pressures, and global competition, China is shaping its future while continuing to play a central role in the world economy.
And that's why this section is critical, dear listeners. The challenges and future directions we discussed provide context for China's ongoing reforms, technological progress, and global influence. For English learners, connecting vocabulary and concepts to real-world examples makes learning more meaningful and practical. In our next section, we will conclude the podcast by reflecting on the lessons from China's economic growth and what it means for the world today.
Dear listeners, as we reach the conclusion of our podcast, let's take a moment to summarize China's remarkable journey. From the 1978 economic reforms, which laid the foundation for growth, to joining the World Trade Organization in 2001, China opened its economy to global trade. These steps created opportunities for millions of people, accelerated urbanization, and integrated China into the global supply chain, setting the stage for decades of rapid development.
That's right, Adam. After WTO entry, China experienced rapid growth in the 2000s, transforming from a primarily agricultural economy to a global manufacturing powerhouse. Millions of people moved to cities, industries expanded, and a new middle class emerged. Alongside economic growth, education, technology, and innovation became critical. Understanding these phases helps learners see how policy, population, and technology interact to shape a nation's economic path.
Following rapid industrial growth, the rise of technology and innovation marked another key phase. Digital platforms, e-commerce, and startups transformed the economy, creating new industries and opportunities. Companies like Alibaba, Tencent, and Huawei became global leaders. The government's focus on education, research, and supportive policies enabled this transformation. For English learners, understanding these developments provides valuable vocabulary and context for discussing modern economies.
Exactly, Adam. And when we examine initiatives like the Belt and Road, we see China expanding its global influence while building infrastructure and economic partnerships worldwide. This phase highlights connectivity, investment, and knowledge transfer. By understanding these concepts, learners improve not only their English vocabulary, but also their comprehension of how countries collaborate, compete, and influence global development.
Challenges and reforms are equally important lessons. Demographic shifts, environmental pressures, debt, and global competition show that growth is never without obstacles. China's response, focusing on sustainable and balanced development, illustrates the importance of planning, innovation, and adaptability. For students, this is a reminder that economies are dynamic. They grow, evolve, and must constantly adjust to changing circumstances.
For English learners, this story is also a lesson in language and comprehension. Terms like urbanization, innovation hub, digital economy, sustainable growth, and foreign direct investment are no longer abstract. They connect directly to real-world examples. By linking vocabulary to stories about economic development, students can better understand global news, historical trends, and current affairs, while improving their listening and speaking skills.
Reflecting on China's journey, one key takeaway is the importance of reforms and international engagement. Opening markets, investing in infrastructure, and encouraging innovation allowed China to integrate with the global economy. Each stage, reform, WTO entry, rapid growth, technological innovation, and global outreach, built upon the previous one. Learners can see how careful planning and adaptation can drive long-term success in any system, whether economic or personal.
Another important reflection is how knowledge and curiosity contribute to growth. By understanding China's economic story, learners gain insights into global economics, history, and culture. This enhances not only English comprehension, but also critical thinking. Thinking about how economies grow and change helps students connect language learning with broader concepts, making English more meaningful and practical.
Dear listeners, the lessons extend beyond China's story. Observing the phases of growth, challenges, and innovation can inspire us to think about our own learning and development. Just as China adapted and evolved, learners can use curiosity, persistence, and consistent effort to improve their skills. Understanding complex topics in English, like economics, technology, and globalization, strengthens both language proficiency and global awareness.
We also encourage students to apply these ideas in practical ways. Pay attention to the words we discussed, read news articles, follow global events, and connect vocabulary with real-life examples. Thinking critically about how economies and societies develop will make learning English more engaging and effective. This method helps you learn language and knowledge simultaneously, preparing you for conversations, study, and future opportunities.
To summarize, the key phases of China's economic journey, from reforms, WTO entry, rapid growth, technological innovation, to global engagement, show how careful planning, adaptation, and innovation drive progress. Challenges like population aging, environmental pressures, and global competition highlight the need for balance and sustainability. For learners, these stories provide rich vocabulary and meaningful context for understanding the modern world.
Ultimately, dear listeners, learning about China's economic growth is more than memorizing facts. It is about seeing patterns, understanding cause and effect, and connecting language to real-world situations. As you reflect on reforms, innovation, and global initiatives, think about how learning English can open doors to understanding history, economics, and international relations, while also improving your critical thinking skills.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through China's economic history. By exploring these lessons, we hope you gain a deeper appreciation of how economies grow and change. Remember, the key to both language learning and global understanding is curiosity, persistence, and connecting new knowledge to your daily life.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep thinking about the world. Observing how economies develop helps you improve your English and expand your knowledge of global trends. We hope today's discussion inspires you to explore more topics, read, listen, and speak with confidence. Growth, whether economic or personal, comes from curiosity, action, and learning from every experience.
And with that, dear listeners, we conclude this podcast. Remember the key words, reflect on the lessons, and think about how economies grow, change, and influence the world. By connecting these ideas to English learning, you strengthen both language and knowledge, preparing yourself for success in the global world.
Thank you again for listening to the English Globe. Keep practicing, stay curious, and continue learning. Understanding China's growth is just one example of how we can connect language learning with understanding our world. We hope this journey inspires you to explore further, read more, and use your English confidently every day.